YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my October 2024 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with my nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you want to skip over the charts, you can do that. If you want to go back to something because you're like, wait, what was that called again? You can do that. All of that is down in the description below. On the way down to the description, make sure that you are subscribed to this channel because sometimes YouTube likes to unsubscribe people for funsies, and if you want extra credit, you can hit that bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload. As a reminder, I will be updating my bookish bingo board from hell and updating you as to how I did on the prompts for Read Queer all year at the end of the video, so make sure to stay tuned for that. In October, I read 14 things for a total of 4,047 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so about 1,356 of those pages were actually about 52 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 9 adult books, 3 YA books, and 2 middle grade books. I read 9 novels, 3 graphic novels, 1 novelette, and 1 anthology. This month, the biggest chunk of what I read was horror and non-fiction, followed by mystery thriller, contemporary, fantasy, and science fiction. If you adjust by page count, not much changes. Almost all of these books were from the library, but I also read 1 from an author's newsletter. I read 5 paperbacks, 4 audiobooks, 4 hardcovers, and 1 ebook. The biggest chunk of my reading was in the 300 to 399 page range, and most of them were published this decade. Half of these books were by female authors, and half of the protagonists were female. In terms of setting, half were set in the US, but I also had reads set in Nigeria, Canada, the UK, and other worlds. In terms of diversity of subject matter, a good chunk were intersectional, had to do with mental health, race, sexuality, or were translated, and a small chunk had no discernible diversity to speak of. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 2.5 star read, 4 3-star reads, 1 3.5 star read, 2 4-star reads, 4 4.5 star reads, and 2 5-star reads. Let's start with our lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? Starting off at 2.5 stars, we have Self-Compassion. This is a non-fiction book about the science, if you will, of self-compassion. This is actually something this author studies, so if we were to strictly be talking about a rating for just talking about self-compassion, this would have got a higher rating. However, this author goes on a few little side quests that I really didn't need to have happen in this book and I did not appreciate. One of them being the side quest of how their child is autistic. If that were all it was in talking about how it can be difficult to parent somebody who needs a little bit extra help, sure, why not? But that's not exactly how that was written, and if anybody is neurodivergent in any way and you don't want to read about a parent oh-woeing being and not really fully thinking of their child as a full thinking human being, then maybe skip this one. Also, there was this weird side tangent where they went to, I believe it was Mongolia, and then the parents were being beaten with sticks because apparently that would cure the autism of the child, and I was just like, what? No! You could have just not put this in here. So although I do really want to learn how to be more compassionate with myself and know that not everything I do is like the worst thing in the world, this maybe isn't the best book on that subject. On to my 3-star reads, the first one being Confetti Realms. This is a standalone graphic novel about these teenagers doing shenanigans on Halloween. They go to the graveyard, but of course these cops are staking out the graveyard because it's Halloween. That's where teens do shenanigans. So they get chased out of there into this tomb, and it takes them into a completely different world where they need to do some challenging things to be able to get back to their own world. As that's happening, there's also interpersonal dynamics between the different characters, and that's explored. Overall, this was fine. I really enjoyed the art style. I thought the colors were really fun, but I really don't know how to feel about the ending, which is why this kind of ended up being a 3-star for me. My next 3-star is also a graphic novel, and that is Little by Little You Can Change the World. This is one aimed at middle grade readers, and it is based on a true story about this boy named Michael who really wanted to help people. He was in the foster system, and he was one of 2 children who went through this one foster house that had about 300 kids over the years, who was actually formally adopted by those parents. And one of the things he learned while he was there is everybody helps everybody. However, when he went to a youth conference, somebody was arguing that homeless people are just lazy and they don't need our help, and he actually stood up and was like, actually, I have experienced homelessness, and I can tell you it was not because I'm lazy, it's because I needed help, and if you have the ability to help, you should be helping. For me, I wanted this book to be a little bit longer. I wanted to learn a little bit more about Michael's activism activism because he is an activist to this day, but also it's for kids, so I get that it wasn't more extensive than it was. Next, in a completely different vein, we have a YA horror book called Find Him Where You Left Him Dead. This is pitched as Jumanji mixed with kind of Japanese themes, and that sounded interesting, so I went into this book just knowing that. This one follows a group of teenagers. However, 4 years previously, something pretty devastating happened because 5 friends went into a cave and then only 4 of them came out again, and the parents of that child still have no idea what happened to that child. And the 4 teenagers that were there with him lied and said that they were in a completely different place that afternoon because they didn't want to get in trouble. Now they're basically being magically called back to this cave to complete this game they started 4 years ago. In order to get out of this completely different realm they find themselves in, they have to do a number of different challenges, which was the theme apparently in at least a couple of things I read this month, not to mention that I am 2 episodes away from finishing Agatha All Along. We started it last night and we're going to finish the last 2 episodes tonight, and that is also a theme in that show. So it's just a month for that. The places where this book really stood out for me was when we were actually getting to know the characters a little bit more, which didn't happen super often. This was very, very action-packed, which I appreciate, but it was so action-packed that at points I'd be like, I must have missed something because how did we get into the middle of this thing? Like, I missed this transition between this one moment and the next moment, and I would have to go back quite often to be like, what's happening right now? And because a lot of the character growth comes later in the novel, I didn't really care about what was happening right now. So maybe it was a personal flaw that I was missing these transitions because I didn't care, but also if I cared from the beginning, it wouldn't be a problem. Finally, for this category, we have Butter, Honey, Pig, Bread. This is a book primarily about 2 twin sisters and their mother. They're all from Nigeria, but this is kind of a book that takes place over many, many years, which means that the sisters end up being in different places. One of the sisters goes to France, as well as I think another place, as well as lives in Canada at one point, and then the other sister definitely lives in Canada and marries a guy there, and her sister and her mom are not there for the wedding. And for a good bulk of this book, that sister is actually bringing her husband to meet her mother and her sister in Nigeria. This is one of those books where, yes, that's kind of the plot, but also we spend so much time in the different backstories and what happened when the kids were growing up, and also what happened when the mother was growing up. And the book kind of transitions between all of these different times and places, so it gives you an idea of how these people are very different or very similar, and it gives you an idea of certain things happen that haven't been really discussed properly. And I do remember enjoying the listening experience because I did listen to this as an audiobook, but it didn't really stick with me that well. I kind of was getting together all of the data for this wrap-up and I went, what was that one about again? And it took me a little while to be like, ah, yes, that's the one about the mom and the 2 daughters and the family tragedies. One of the daughters, however, has trained as a chef, which really comes into play because this book is broken up into 4 different sections, that being butter, honey, pig, and bread, and that's because there are different things that she is making during the different sections of the book that have those ingredients as kind of the forefront. On to my one 3.5-star read, and that was Chomp Chomp. That was the novelette that I read this month, and this is the one that I got from an author's newsletter. I honestly can't remember if you got it for free through the author's newsletter or if it was like a very small amount and I just paid for it. I honestly can't remember. I read this as an ebook though. This one is a very short 75-page novelette about this woman who is kind of a classic 50s housewife type of character, and she finds herself getting all dolled up to go on this date at the diner, and the date that she's with is kind of not a great guy, but she decides to leave with him and they go to the forest to do some maybe interesting things, and then it completely changes from there. This is billed as an erotic horror book, which is not something I knew that I would ever pick up before. However, I've read at least one thing from this author before and enjoyed it, so I was like, I'll give it a try, and it's way weirder than you're probably thinking from how I've described it. But it's also super short. I don't want to wreck it for you. If you're at all interested, definitely take a look at it. On to my 4 stars, the first one being an anthology which is called Becoming Who We Are. This is where a bunch of different writers have written stories about real life people, and then different illustrators have brought those stories to life. And it's basically about how these different people realized they were trans and what their upbringing was like and what they look like as a kid versus what they look like as an adult. It's delightful. I believe the target audience is a middle grade audience, and it was just a good time. My other 4-star read was completely different, and that was So Thirsty. This is a vampire novel novel. This starts off as two best friends who are going on a girls' weekend to celebrate the protagonist's birthday, and this weekend was actually a present from her husband because she doesn't always get to see her best friend very often. Her best friend actually works as her boyfriend's tour manager, so she's been touring with the band for a while, and she actually has to fly in from Europe to the States to go on this weekend. However, our main character thinks that maybe there's a chance that this weekend is more of a present for him because he has cheated in the past, and she's really worried that he's going to cheat on her while she's away on this weekend. As she and her best friend reconnect and they decide to go out on the first night that they're staying at this secluded cabin area that's really actually a bougie hotel complex, they go out, they get some drinks. Her best friend ends up spending way too much of the night talking to this rando that they don't know. And then the next night she says that she has a surprise for her, which she should know is not going to go over well because Sloane, our main character, doesn't like surprises. She didn't like the fact that this weekend was a surprise. She's not really going to like this surprise, but this surprise changes both their lives forever. I think, knowing that it's a vampire novel, I think you can guess what's going to happen. But from there, things just keep happening, and you never really know exactly how any of those things are going to turn out. At the heart of this one, it's about friendship and what your life would look like if things were drastically changed on a dime, and I found it really interesting. I found it really difficult to put this one down because I wanted to know what was going to happen. On to my 4.5 star books, the first one being The Seep. This one is about an alien invasion, and by the point that people realize that the aliens have actually landed on the planet, most people have actually been infected. This is not aliens like big green creatures or little gray men or those type of aliens. They're actually more like a microorganism that can get into a host via something like water, which is how it got into most people. And this alien life force doesn't seem to really want to destroy, kind of like all of the alien movies that we see in our media, like Independence Day, the Alien franchise, etc. It actually wants people to be nice to each other, to be kind. However, the unforeseen circumstance of that is it actually flattens the human experience in a way that the alien organism just cannot comprehend. This one is really interesting. It was fairly short and it'd be interesting to reread because there's tons that happened in this that I feel like I kind of just glossed over in my brain. Like I read it, I took it in, but it didn't really stay there as long as I wanted it to because I was rushing to figure out what was going to go on. And that being said, I can't even really tell you how it ended besides like sort of remembering, but I'm really bad at remembering exact endings of books. I can say, however, this one was very interesting though. Next we have another middle grade book, and that is Both Can Be True. This one is about our main character Ash, who is gender fluid and is really struggling with coming out about that at their new school because at their last school they were heavily bullied, and they're just really coming to terms with this because one parent is very good about this situation and the other parent is like, you need to pick one or the other. You can't be both. That's not a thing. Which is obviously incorrect and unhelpful. Our other point of view character is a boy named Daniel who Ash actually has a crush on, and he is a very sensitive boy, which means that his brother and his mom really look down on him for this because like he will cry at a drop of a hat if that's the emotion that presents itself, and they want him to man up, which is really unfortunate because that's gross. Not only did his dad move out recently and he's kind of worried about that situation, but their family dog died a few months ago and he's really grieving that loss. So he's decided to volunteer at this local shelter. And all of that is going perfectly well until one day the veterinarian was supposed to euthanize this one dog but got called away mid-process and told the other person in the room to give the second shot, but she, this grown woman, decided not to, and now she's going to basically smuggle this dog out and let this dog live out the rest of her life in her care. However, before she can do that, she is called away and now Daniel has to smuggle out this dog and has to figure out how to take care of this dog, even though he's not allowed to bring a dog home. Ash and Daniel have a class together, so they know each other, and Ash ends up helping with their circumstance, and everything about this is just really delightful. We have so much going on in this because not only does Ash have this whole conflict about whether or not to tell Daniel sometimes I'm a boy, sometimes I'm a girl, but also Ash has this passion for cross country, which they do not want to do because the coaches make them pick a side, and has this passion for music, which makes them really want to join this girl punk band when they find out about it. However, they're not always a girl. And they also have a version of synesthesia where they can actually see sounds and they draw out what sounds look like to them, which is just cool. But that was also the root of why somebody they liked at their old school ended up bullying them. At least that's how Ash sees it. Obviously the root is that person was hateful and that was ridiculous. But because they made this gesture of drawing out what their crush's favorite song looked like, and then the crush reacted poorly, and then there was bullying, and yeah, it's a whole thing. Also, the dog in this is a little Pomeranian who is pretty incontinent and just adorable and named Tubarka, and that whole situation is also very interesting because yes, this dog was taken to be euthanized, but the actual owner of the dog doesn't know that. So yes, this gets very messy. I probably would have rated this 5 stars, but there was this one situation in the book where Daniel did something to a friend and it was never really brought up and like fully apologized for, and that kind of bothered me. But other than that, this was absolutely delightful. Next we have Stay Awake, which is such an interesting concept. As we start out this book with our main character, she wakes up in a cab and she can't remember how she got into this cab, but she's being dropped off right at her apartment late at night, like 3 o'clock in the morning. So she's like, okay, well, I must have had a little bit too much to drink, that's fine. She tries to get into her apartment and she doesn't have her keys, so she buzzes her roommate, and who answers is not her roommate. It's some other people that claim they live in her apartment. So she barges into the apartment and realizes that everything is different, but it's definitely her apartment because she recognizes like different scratches or wear and tear around the apartment, but like these other people live there now, and she's like, what happened to my cat? What is going on? And she ends up having to leave, but she's just absolutely confused and happens to notice that she has all this writing on her hands, and some of the writing right across her knuckles says stay awake, but she doesn't know why. Across town we have a police detective that ends up at the scene of a murder, and the same phrase, stay awake, is actually written in blood on the window of the place where the person was murdered. So we're thinking these two things might be connected, but we don't really know why. This one was a very cool premise. I really enjoyed being in these two different perspectives because every time the first protagonist fell asleep, her memory reset and she would wake up and have no idea what was going on. And the whole reason behind that is fully explained. I don't want to tell you how, because that's really fun to figure out as the book is going on. But this one had some great twists and turns that I did not see coming. And then just before they were being announced, I was like, oh no, what if it's this? Oh no, did this thing happen? And I love a book that can do that to me. Finally, for my 4.5 stars, we have How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying. This was the first book I read this month, and I honestly thought I'd given it a 5, and I don't know why I gave it a 4.5. Maybe I was just trying not to be hyperbolic in the first book that I read, because I kind of rate them as I go. But this book was fantastic. This is all about this character who is bisexual and snarky, and oh yeah, about 1,000 years ago got sucked into this fantasy realm where every time she dies, she wakes up in this pool of water and there's some old guy telling her that she's the chosen one, which means that over these last 1,000 years or so, she's had over 200 lives where she's gotten up, she's tried to be the chosen one, she gets brutally murdered, she gets up, she tries to be the chosen one, she gets brutally murdered. And it comes to a point where she decides, screw this, I don't want to be the chosen one, I'm gonna try to become the Dark Lord. Because invariably, all of those other lives, she's just ended up being murdered by either the Dark Lord or somebody working for the Dark Lord. This is really fun because this character is from our world, but has been living in this fantasy world for so long that she knows references that we know, but she doesn't exactly remember them super well because, like, she's been going for a really long time. Are you going to remember every detail of a popular movie from 1,000 years ago? I don't think so. It's also very fun because obviously her first try at becoming the Dark Lord doesn't succeed and she ends up back in the pond again. But as she keeps trying and trying and trying, she basically gets to the point where people think she's prophetic because she'll be like, oh, yep, and that thing's gonna happen, and oh yeah, these people are over here, because she knows, because she's lived it before. This one is super cool. It's also the start of a series, which I don't know if I realized when I started it, and it ends in such a way that you're like, oh crap, I want to read the second book, and unfortunately it's not out until next year, but I will want to read it when it drops. As for my 5-star reads, I have 2 and they're pretty even as to which I liked more, but I had to pick one to go first, so that's Carrion Comfort. This is actually the second in a series, and I didn't know that when somebody else put it on my 40 Before 40 TBR, but I was like, it's a second in a mystery, like, detective series, so I don't think I really need to read the first one to read this one, and that's absolutely correct. However, at the time of filming this, I am reading the first one because I enjoyed the second one so much that I decided to double back and figure out how some of these characters got there. This book takes place in a very small Scottish town in kind of the north of Scotland. It's very remote, it's very isolated, it's very everybody knows everybody. And there is a body found. Unfortunately, it's found by humans far after it's found by ravens, so some of the things of the fleshiest persuasion are gone at this point. So not only do they have to figure out who this person was, they have to figure out how they got here, because cause of death is drowning, but this person was found in like a dry barn. This is one of those books that head hops between a bunch of different characters in this very small town, as well as the police detectives, and I just really enjoyed that. I didn't have much trouble at all remembering which character was which is an art. And I can definitely say it took me a really long time to catch on to who the killer was, and that was all super interesting. Like I said, I'm also now enjoying the first book, which takes place on the Isle of Skye, which is a place I visited like 15 years ago for a night. So I'm just tickled pink that I get to go back there even though I'm not really there. The other 5-star book I read this month was Nosferatu by Joe Hill. If you like audiobooks, you should listen to this audiobook because it is narrated by Kate Mulgrew and she does a fantastic job. Not only does she have very distinct voices for all of the characters, which I obviously love, but she does them so well. She's incredibly emotive. Some of these characters are absolutely disgusting. They are the bad guys, and the things they say I would not want to say out loud, but she makes it even convincing that this character is saying it out loud, and I just love her. You probably want to know what the book is actually about, though, instead of just how much I love Kate Mulgrew. This book is kind of a vampire book, as you might be able to guess from Nosferatu, or Nosferatu. And our vampire character is a man by the name of Charlie Manx. He uses this 1930s Wraith, which is a type of car, with the license plate Nosferatu, to pick up children and basically steal their life force as he takes them to this place called Christmas Land, where everything's good and happy. Except for they play games like Scissors for the Drifter, which you can just imagine what that game is, and I think you'll get it, and I think you'll be horrified. Our main character for this book, however, is a girl named Vic. Vic is also called the Brat by her dad, and she's Victoria, if you're being formal about it, and she's just a normal kid, but her parents fight a lot, and she really hates that. On one of her birthdays, she's gifted this bike that's a little bit too big for her, but her dad knows she's going to grow into it, and one day she decides to go on this bike ride because she really wants to go find this bracelet that her mom probably left behind. And if she just finds the bracelet, they'll stop fighting about it, and she ends up crossing this bridge that doesn't exist anymore and goes right to the town where her mom actually left the bracelet, which is way too far away for a kid to have biked properly, like on our roads. And then by the time she gets back, she's pretty sick, but she's got the bracelet. However, every time she uses this bridge throughout her childhood, it kind of becomes more like that was a dream that once happened. In one of these dreamlike scenarios, she meets somebody who actually explains to her exactly what's going on with her bike and this bridge. But of course, she doesn't really believe it when she wakes up later. Those two characters cross paths, and let's just say some things happen and it goes from there. This is an incredible book because you have not only the references to Dracula, because there's definitely a Renfield character and that type of thing, but then you also have all of these little nods to Stephen King type things, which if you don't know, Joe Hill is Stephen King's son. And then at the end, Joe Hill actually has this whole conversation about how he learned to write kind of interior characters and character motivations from reading his mom's novels, which I just thought was great. Altogether, I just really enjoyed this book. As for the October prompts for Read Queer All Year, this is them, and I didn't do too well this month. I really did want to find a book with intersex rep, but I couldn't find any that I hadn't actually read before, and I've only read a couple, so there have to be more out there, but anything I found online, my library didn't have. Also, I didn't read anything specifically for LGBTQ+ month, so that was a failure. But I was able to use Both Can Be True for genderqueer rep as well as coming out. As for my bookish bingo board from hell, I still only have one square checked off on this, which is a shame, but a couple of other squares are getting closer. There's not a lot of changes from last month. I actually added 2 books to the one square I don't need to keep adding to because I've already checked it off, and that's the 400 plus page books. I added How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying, as well as Nosferatu. For my 40 before 40 TBR, I actually added 3 books, so I only need to do 1 more of these books and then I can check off this square, and that was The Seep, Nosferatu, and Carrion Comfort. And I can also add Carrion Comfort and The Seep to library TBR veterans, because I have had those on my list at my library for ages and just hadn't gotten around to actually taking them out of the library. If you want to hear me talk more about these books, or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these, or you now want to read any of these, please let me know all about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!